I walked across the stage to receive my diploma and heard nothing. No cheers, no applause, no one calling my name. I looked at the 4 seats I'd reserved 3 months ago. Empty. Every single one. While families around me screamed with joy and waved homemade signs, I accepted my degree in silence, my hands trembling, my smile frozen like a mask I couldn't take off. I was 35 years old. I'd worked 5 years for this moment. Night classes after exhausting workdays, student loans. I paid myself not a single dollar from anyone. And my family chose my sister's barbecue party over my graduation. But that wasn't the worst part. When I walked off stage, my phone showed 45 missed calls from Mom. One text, "We need to talk, urgently." They didn't want to apologize. They wanted $12,000 for my sister's dream honeymoon. I didn't give them the money. And 3 days later, the police knocked on my parents' door and revealed a secret that explained why I'd always been invisible in my own family. Have you ever discovered your whole life was built on a lie? My name is Madison Sharp. I'm 35 years old, a senior financial analyst at one of the largest accounting firms in the city. And until that graduation day, I had spent my entire life believing that if I just worked hard enough, my family would finally see me. After I left the stage, I stood in the parking lot with my diploma clutched against my chest like a shield. The spring air was warm, but I felt cold inside. I needed answers. I called my cousin Amanda, the only person in my family who had ever been honest with me, and asked her where everyone was. Her silence told me everything before her words did. "They're at Kelsey's place," she finally said, her voice careful and apologetic. "Some kind of pre-wedding barbecue. Your mom said Kelsey was stressed about the wedding plans and needed family support today. The wedding was 3 months away. My graduation was today. But somehow my sister's stress about a party she was throwing for herself mattered more than the degree I had spent 5 years earning. I shouldn't have been surprised. I had spent my whole life being second to Kelsey, and I knew exactly why. My mother told me once during an argument when I was 19, "You were such a difficult pregnancy, Madison. Your father and I almost didn't survive that year, the marriage, I mean. I was born when my parents were 22, broke working double shifts, and on the verge of divorce. I represented their hardest years. Every time they looked at me, they saw struggle and sacrifice and resentment. Kelsey came 7 years later after they had stable jobs and a house and a marriage that had learned how to breathe. She was planned, she was wanted, she was the child they chose to have. I was the child they had to have. That difference had shaped everything between us for 35 years. Walking back toward my car, I thought about the only 2 times I had met Derek, Kelsey's fiancé, in the 18 months they had been together. Both conversations felt strange now that I replayed them. He had asked me questions that seemed too specific: what kind of work I did, whether I owned my condo, or rented, how I liked living downtown. I thought he was just being polite. But I remembered something else. 3 years ago, Kelsey had asked me to help with our parents' tax paperwork. I had emailed her my social security number and other personal details to forward to the family accountant, and 6 months ago at Christmas, Derek had volunteered to help my father clean out the garage. Dad's old filing cabinet was in that garage, the one that still held copies of my birth certificate, my childhood medical records, everything. At the time, I thought Derek was being helpful. Now I wasn't sure what to think. I was about to unlock my car when I heard someone call my name. I turned and saw Barbara Chen, my mentor at work for the past 5 years, walking toward me with 3 of my colleagues. They were carrying flowers and a balloon that said, "Congratulations." Barbara's smile was warm and knowing. "You didn't think we'd let you celebrate alone, did you?" I burst into tears. I hugged each of them and posed for photos and thanked them more times than I could count. But even as I held those flowers, my eyes kept drifting back to the building, to the empty auditorium, to the 4 chairs no one had filled. Barbara had told me something last week when I admitted I was worried my family wouldn't come. Family isn't always who you're born to, Madison. Sometimes it's who shows up. I didn't fully understand what she meant until that moment. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with another voicemail from my mother, but this time her voice sounded different. Not demanding, not dismissive, afraid. "Madison, we need you here tonight. It's about Kelsey. Please come." Something was very wrong. I could feel it in my bones. And somehow I knew that whatever was waiting for me at my parents' house would change everything. I pulled into my parents' driveway, still wearing my graduation dress. The house looked the same as it always did: white siding, blue shutters. The rosebush my mother planted when Kelsey was born still blooming by the front porch, but something felt different tonight. The lights were all on, every window glowing, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. I sat in my car for a full minute trying to prepare myself for whatever was waiting inside. My mother's voice on that voicemail had sounded genuinely afraid, and in 35 years, I had rarely heard her sound like that. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked to the front door. No one greeted me when I stepped inside. No one said congratulations. No one apologized for missing my graduation. The whole family was gathered in the living room like they were waiting for a funeral. My mother sat on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands so tightly her knuckles had gone white. My father stared at the floor, his jaw clenched, refusing to meet my eyes. Kelsey was curled up in the armchair with red puffy eyes and a tissue crumpled in her fist. And Derek sat beside her on the armrest, his expression calm and watchful, in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. He looked at me the way a poker player looks at the cards, calculating, assessing, waiting to see what I would do. My father spoke first, still not looking at me. "Sit down, Madison. We have a situation. Not how was your graduation. Not we are so proud of you. Not even a simple sorry we could not make it. Just sit down, we need something from you." I should have turned around and walked out right then. But I didn't. I sat down on the love seat across from them and waited. My mother launched into the explanation before I could ask any questions. Her words tumbled out fast and desperate, like she had rehearsed them. Kelsey and Derek needed money for their honeymoon. They had found their dream trip to Bali, a private villa, a personal chef, 2 weeks in paradise. But they were temporarily short on cash. The payment deadline was in 48 hours. They needed exactly $12,000. And I was the only one who could help right now. My mother looked at me with tears already forming in her eyes, and I recognized the expression. I had seen it my whole life. It was the face she made when she wanted something and expected me to give it without question. But then my father added something that caught my attention. He finally looked up and I saw something in his face I had never seen before, hope mixed with desperation. "Derek has been working on a business opportunity," he said carefully. "Once it comes through, he's going to invest $50,000 in my consulting firm. This is just a bridge loan until then, Madison. A few weeks at most." I watched my father's face as he spoke, and suddenly I understood. This was not just about Kelsey's honeymoon. My father had been promised something. Derek had dangled money in front of him, and my father had taken the bait. He had skin in the game now. That was why they had all chosen Kelsey's barbecue over my graduation. That was why they were all sitting here together presenting a united front. They needed me to say yes so they could all get what they wanted. My mother started crying. "You don't have children, Madison. You don't have a mortgage. What else is your money for if not helping your family?" My father nodded along. "Family helps family. That's what we've always taught you." Kelsey finally spoke, her voice small and trembling like a child asking for a toy. "I've dreamed of this honeymoon my whole life, Maddie. Please." It would mean everything to me. I looked at each of them in turn, and then my eyes landed on Derek. He had not said a word since I arrived, but he was watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His gaze felt like an assessment, like he was calculating whether his investment in this family was about to pay off or fall apart. I asked a simple question. "Can I see the booking confirmation, the invoice for the trip?" The room went completely silent. My mother stopped crying. My father's jaw tightened. Kelsey looked at Derek with something that might have been panic. Derek answered smoothly, his voice calm and rehearsed. "It's handled through my business account. I can forward you the details later." I nodded slowly, but my mind was racing. $12,000 was an oddly specific number for a honeymoon package. 48 hours was an unusual deadline for a resort booking. Most places would negotiate if you called and explained. And when I asked Derek what exactly his business did, he gave me the same vague answer Kelsey always gave when I asked about him: consulting and investments. 2 words that meant everything and nothing at the same time. Then I noticed something else. On the side table near the front door, there was a stack of mail. Most of it was addressed to my parents, but several envelopes caught my eye. They were addressed to Madison Sharp at this address, my parents' address, the house I had not lived in for 15 years. I stared at those envelopes for a long moment, and a cold feeling began to spread through my chest. I told them I needed time to think. I stood up and walked toward the door, and as I passed the hallway, I heard voices from the kitchen, Derek and Kelsey whispering urgently. I stopped just out of sight and listened. "She's asking too many questions," Derek hissed. "The accounts are frozen. We needed that cash yesterday." Kelsey's response made my blood run cold. "She'll give in. She always does. Just let Mom work on her a little longer. She always does." Those 3 words hit me harder than the $12,000 demand ever could. My family did not see me as a person. They saw me as a resource, a reliable ATM that had never failed to deliver. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my door. Something was very wrong. I could feel it in my gut, the same instinct that had made me successful in my career. Numbers do not lie, and something about those numbers did not add up. I sat down at my computer and pulled up my credit report for the first time in over a year. 2 years ago, I had changed my personal email address and completely forgot to update my credit monitoring alerts. They had been going to an old inbox I never checked anymore. Now I saw what those alerts had been trying to tell me. 3 credit card accounts I had never opened, a total debt of $47,000, and the contact address on every single account was my parents' house. The accounts had been opened 18 months ago, the exact month Derek had started dating my sister. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and called my bank's fraud department. Then I filed a report with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. I did not sleep that night. I just sat there in the dark, staring at that credit report, understanding for the first time that the people who were supposed to love me had been stealing from me all along. The question was no longer whether my family knew. The question was how much they had benefited. And I was going to find out the truth, no matter what it cost. The next 6 days changed everything I thought I knew about my family and about the man my sister was going to marry. I could not let go of the questions that kept me awake that first night, so I did what I do best: I investigated. I started with Derek's social media profiles, looking for anything that might explain who he really was. I ran a reverse image search on his profile photo, and what I found made my stomach turn. The same face appeared on an old account from 3 years ago in another state, but the name was different. That account belonged to someone named David Mercer. I searched that name and found a local news article from a small town in Ohio. The headline read, "Charming Con Artist Targets Family Dynamic." The article described a man who had stolen over $80,000 from 3 families using a very specific method. He did not target random wealthy women. He looked for families with what the article called scapegoat dynamics, families where one member was isolated, successful, and not fully trusted or believed by the rest of the family. He would romance someone close to the scapegoat, gain access to personal information, and then open credit accounts in the scapegoat's name. By the time anyone noticed, he would be gone. The article included a photo that was slightly blurry, but I recognized the smile. I recognized the eyes. It was Derek. I called the FBI the next morning and spoke with the agent who had been assigned to my fraud report. Her name was Agent Torres, and when I told her what I had found, she went quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that confirmed my worst fears. "We've been tracking this individual for 8 months, Ms. Sharp. He has 7 confirmed victims across 4 states. The total amount stolen is over $340,000. We knew he was somewhere in your region, but we couldn't locate his current address. Your report gave us exactly what we needed." She paused. "The mailing address on those fraudulent accounts, that's where he's been receiving correspondence." I told her yes, that was my parents' house. She asked if I could tell her a time when Derek would definitely be at that location. I thought about it for a moment, and then I told her I could do better than that. I could make sure the whole family was there. On the 6th day after my graduation, I drove back to my parents' house. This time, I was not wearing my graduation dress. I was wearing armor, the armor of truth. I carried a folder full of evidence printouts of my credit report, screenshots of the fraudulent accounts, and a copy of that news article from Ohio. I had called my mother that morning and told her I was ready to talk about the money. She sounded relieved, almost grateful. She had no idea what was coming. When I walked into the living room, they were all there just like before. My mother on the couch, my father in his chair, Kelsey and Derek side by side. They looked at me with expectation, like they were waiting for me to hand over a check. Instead, I walked to the dining room table and spread out everything I had brought. 3 credit accounts in my name, I said, keeping my voice steady, $47,000 in debt. Every single account lists this address, your address, as the contact. Mail addressed to me has been coming here for 18 months. Mail that you have been collecting and handing to Derek without telling me. I looked at each of them in turn. Who wants to explain? The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then the truth started coming out in pieces like blood from a wound that had finally been lanced. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling. Derek had told them he needed to borrow my credit information for a business opportunity. It was supposed to be temporary, just a short-term bridge until his investments paid off. He promised he would pay everything back before I ever noticed. My father jumped in his face, red with shame and something else, anger at being caught. Derek had also promised to invest $50,000 in my father's struggling consulting business once the deal closed. That was why my father had agreed. That was why he had looked the other way when mail addressed to me started showing up at their house. My mother tried to explain further, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. We had doubts, Madison, but Derek said it was temporary. And you have good credit, you weren't even using it. You don't have a mortgage or car payments. We didn't think it would hurt you. My father added the words that broke something inside me. We didn't ask too many questions because we didn't want to know the answers. We just wanted to believe it would all work out. I stood there absorbing what they had just admitted. My parents had not failed me through ignorance. They had failed me through choice. They knew something was wrong. They suspected something was illegal. And they chose to look the other way because Derek had promised them money. They chose their own potential benefit over protecting their own daughter. The doorbell rang. Everyone jumped except me. I walked to the door and opened it, and standing on the porch were two people in dark suits. Agent Torres, the woman I had spoken to on the phone, and her partner. They showed their badges and asked to come inside. My family watched in stunned silence as the agents entered the living room. Agent Torres looked at Derek and spoke in a calm, professional voice. Derek Lawson, also known as David Mercer, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain an attorney. She continued reading his rights as her partner moved toward him with handcuffs. Derek did not run. He did not panic. He did not beg or cry or make excuses. He simply stood up, straightened his collar like he was preparing for a business meeting, and looked directly at me. The charming smile was gone. The warm eyes were gone. What I saw instead was cold and flat and empty, the face of a predator who had been caught but felt no remorse. I want my lawyer, he said calmly. That was all. No apology to my sister, no explanation to my parents. Just the calculated response of a man who had done this before and knew exactly how the system worked. Kelsey started screaming. She grabbed at Derek's arm as the agents led him toward the door, crying that she did not know, that she had no idea it was this bad. Agent Torres told her gently but firmly that she would need to come to the field office tomorrow to answer questions about her involvement. My father sat frozen in his chair, staring at nothing, his dreams of a $50,000 investment crumbling around him. And my mother turned to me with tears streaming down her face, and she said the words I will never forget. If you had just given us the $12,000, none of this would have happened. We could have handled it quietly. We could have fixed it ourselves. Why did you have to ruin everything, Madison? Why couldn't you just help your family for once? I stared at her. Even now, with FBI agents in her living room, with a con artist in handcuffs, with $47,000 of fraud in my name, she was blaming me. I was the villain in her story. I had always been the villain. I watched through the window as the agents put Derek in the back of their vehicle. Then I looked at my mother one last time. There was no apology in her eyes, no shame, just blame and resentment, and the same look she had given me my entire life. The look that said I was a burden, a problem, a difficult child who never did what she was supposed to do. In that moment, I finally understood something I had spent 35 years avoiding. My family did not fail me when Derek came along. They had been failing me since the day I was born. Derek did not break anything. He just made it impossible to keep pretending the cracks were not there all along. The weeks that followed Derek's arrest were some of the hardest of my life, but not for the reasons you might expect. I had spent 35 years believing that if I just tried hard enough, my family would finally love me the way I needed them to. Watching that belief die was more painful than any fraud or betrayal, but I also watched justice unfold in ways I never thought possible, and that gave me something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Derek faced 14 federal charges, including wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy. The prosecutors documented his pattern of targeting families with scapegoat dynamics, families just like mine, where one member was isolated and successful and never quite believed by the people who should have protected her. He had 7 confirmed victims across 4 states, and the total amount he had stolen exceeded $340,000. His lawyer tried to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Derek took a plea deal to avoid trial. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole until he served at least 85% of his sentence. He was ordered to pay full restitution to all 7 victims, and upon release, he would face 5 years of supervised probation and a lifetime ban from working in any financial services industry. The charming smile and warm eyes that had fooled my sister and my parents would spend the next decade behind bars. Kelsey did not escape consequences either. FBI investigators questioned her extensively about her involvement. They determined she had not directly opened any accounts or forged any documents in my name, but the evidence showed she knew Derek was doing something with my information. She had seen the mail addressed to me arriving at our parents' house. She had heard Derek's whispered conversations about accounts and deadlines, and she had chosen to stay silent because she wanted to believe in the fairy tale he was selling her. Prosecutors initially considered charging her with something called misprision of felony, which is a federal crime that carries up to 3 years in prison. But proving that she had full knowledge of the crime was difficult, with only circumstantial evidence. In the end, she accepted a plea deal, 18 months of probation, 300 hours of community service, a $5,000 fine, and a federal conviction on her permanent record. She avoided jail time, but that conviction would follow her for the rest of her life. It would appear on every background check for employment, housing, and credit applications. The dream wedding she had planned for months was canceled. All the deposits were lost. The honeymoon to Bali that had started this whole nightmare would never happen. My parents were interviewed by FBI agents multiple times. They stuck to their story. Derek told them it would be temporary. They did not understand it was illegal. They thought he would pay everything back. The agents documented something called willful blindness, which is the legal term for deliberately avoiding knowledge of a crime. My parents had suspected something was wrong, but they had chosen not to ask questions because they did not want to know the answers. The U.S. Attorney's Office ultimately declined to prosecute them due to insufficient evidence of direct conspiracy, but they did not escape consequences. Their names appeared in court documents as persons of interest, and word spread through their small community within weeks. My mother could no longer face her book club because the whispers stopped the moment she entered a room. My father avoided the golf course where he had been a member for 20 years because former friends now looked away when they saw him. The perfect family image they had spent decades building crumbled in a matter of weeks. They listed their house for sale within the first month after Derek's arrest, and 4 months later, they sold it well below market value to a buyer who did not ask questions. They moved to a small town in another state where no one knew their name. I did not ask for their new address. Before they left, my family made one last effort to pull me back in. My mother called me sobbing, begging me to talk to the prosecutor on Kelsey's behalf. "Tell them she didn't mean any harm," she pleaded. "She was manipulated by Derek, too. She's your sister Madison." My father sent a long email about how family forgives family and how outsiders should not be allowed to tear apart what we had built together. Kelsey texted me directly. "We're both victims here, Maddie. Derek fooled all of us. Don't abandon me now." I did not block them immediately. For 4 days, I let the messages pile up. I read every single one. I even drafted responses, angry ones, pleading ones, cold and distant ones, and deleted them all before sending. I did not sleep well those nights. Part of me still wanted to fix everything, to find some way back to the family I had always wished I had. On the 3rd day, I cried for hours. On the 4th day, my mother sent one more message. "I don't understand why you're doing this to us, after everything we sacrificed for you." I read those words 3 times. Then I finally understood. They still thought they were the victims. They still thought I owed them something. After 35 years of being their scapegoat, nothing had changed. I blocked every single number. The following week, Barbara took me to lunch at a quiet restaurant downtown. I admitted to her that I had almost given in. I had almost called the prosecutor. I had almost apologized to my mother for causing trouble. Barbara nodded without any judgment and then shared something she had never told me before. 30 years ago, she discovered that her own brother had been stealing from their elderly mother's retirement accounts. When Barbara reported him to the authorities, her family cut her off completely. They chose the thief over the person who told the truth. The first year is brutal. Barbara told me, her voice gentle but honest. You'll question yourself constantly. You'll wonder if you did the right thing. You'll miss people who hurt you. And then one day you'll wake up and realize that the absence of their chaos feels like peace. That's when you know you made the right choice. I cried right there in the restaurant, not caring who saw me. But I was not crying for my family anymore. I was crying for the 35 years I had spent hoping they would change. The financial recovery took months. I spent countless hours working with banks, credit bureaus, and FBI victim services to clear my name. Because I had reported the fraud immediately, and the FBI had confirmed Derek's scheme, the banks eventually agreed to remove all the fraudulent accounts from my credit history. But the process was exhausting. Dozens of phone calls, stacks of paperwork, notarized affidavits, disputes that had to be filed and refiled when they were rejected the first time. I did not have to pay the $47,000. The banks absorbed the loss and would pursue Derek through the court-ordered restitution. By the 5th month, my credit score began recovering. By the 6th month, it was nearly back to where it had been before Derek entered our lives. Not because the system worked perfectly, but because I fought for every single point. 2 months after my parents moved away, I came home from work to find a handwritten letter in my mailbox. There was no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting the moment I saw it. I stood in my kitchen holding that envelope, the trash can within arm's reach. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading a single word. Part of me needed to know what it said. And part of me wondered if this was finally the closure I had been waiting for, or just another manipulation disguised as an olive branch. I opened the letter that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside me and read my mother's words slowly twice, making sure I understood every sentence. Her handwriting was careful and measured the same elegant script she had always used for birthday cards and thank you notes. But the words themselves were exactly what I had come to expect from her. There was no real apology for what had happened. Instead, she apologized that things became so difficult for everyone. She wrote that she hoped someday I would understand that she was just trying to keep the family together. That was all she ever wanted. She never meant to hurt me. I read those lines over and over, searching for something that was not there. There was no acknowledgement of the fraud, no mention of Derek's crimes, or the $47,000 stolen in my name. No recognition that I had been a victim. The entire letter was about my mother's pain, my mother's intentions, my mother's hope that I would eventually come around. Even in reaching out, she had centered herself. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a box with old family photographs, and closed the lid. I did not throw it away, but I did not respond either. Some closure does not require a reply. Some doors do not need to be slammed shut. They just need to stay closed. I still hear updates sometimes through my cousin Amanda, the only family member I did not cut off. Derek is serving his sentence in federal prison. His case was featured in a documentary about financial crimes used as a warning about romance scams that target families with dysfunction. Kelsey completed her community service and now works part-time at a grocery store in another state, living with distant relatives while she tries to rebuild her life. She is still single, still figuring out who she is without a man defining her worth. My parents settled in a small town where no one knows their history. Amanda visited them once and said they seemed smaller somehow, quieter, less certain of themselves. The confidence they used to carry like armor has cracked and faded. I did not ask for their new address. I did not search for it online. I realized that I simply do not need to know. My own life has changed in ways I never expected. The promotion I had been working toward for 2 years finally came through, and Barbara made sure I understood something important. She told me directly, "You earned this long before any of this happened, Madison. This promotion is because of the project you led last year, because of the skills you've developed. Don't let your family take credit for your success too." Those words meant more to me than any raise or title ever could. I used part of my bonus to buy a small condo on the east side of the city. For the first time in my life, I decorated a space exactly the way I wanted, without worrying about what anyone else would think. I chose bright colors for the walls and filled every windowsill with plants. I hung art that I picked out myself, pieces that make me smile every time I walk past them. The space is small, but it is mine. I also joined a support group for survivors of family financial abuse. I was nervous the first time I walked through those doors, worried that my story was not serious enough. Instead, I found dozens of women with stories just like mine, mothers exploited by their own children, sisters stolen from by siblings they trusted, daughters used as ATMs by parents who saw them as resources rather than people. We meet every Thursday evening, and those 2 hours have become sacred to me. I am not alone anymore. I also started dating again. Barbara introduced me to a colleague's friend, a man named James who laughs easily and asks questions and actually listens to the answers. We are taking things slowly, but for the first time in my life, I am with someone who seems genuinely interested in who I am rather than what I can provide. Last month, I finally framed my diploma and hung it on my living room wall. Beside it, I placed a photograph from graduation day. Not a picture of the empty chairs, but the one taken afterward with Barbara and my 3 colleagues from work. In the photo, we are all smiling. Barbara is holding the flowers they brought, and someone is waving that silly balloon that said, "Congratulations." I look at that photograph differently now than I did 6 months ago. On graduation day, I was so focused on who was not there that I barely registered who was. I thanked Barbara and the others, but I could not fully receive their gift because I was still mourning the family who had chosen a barbecue over my milestone. Now, I see the truth clearly. Barbara drove 45 minutes after a full workday just to surprise me. My colleagues rearranged their evening plans to be there. They celebrated me when my own blood would not. The people who mattered were there all along. I just could not see them through my tears. I sit in my condo on quiet Sunday mornings now, with coffee in hand and sunlight warming the room. And I think about everything that happened. I think about my mother's letter about that phrase I was just trying to keep the family together. And I finally understand something she will never admit. The family was never together. It was a hierarchy with Kelsey at the top, me at the bottom, and my parents maintaining the structure. My role was to give. Everyone else's role was to take. Derek did not create that system. He just recognized it and exploited it. And when I finally stopped playing my part, the whole thing collapsed. I spent 35 years trying to earn a place in a family that never had room for me. I kept hoping that if I worked harder, achieved more, sacrificed enough, they would finally see me. They never did. Not because I was not enough, but because truly seeing me would have meant questioning the system that served them so well. People ask me sometimes if I miss my family. The honest answer is that I miss the family I thought I had. I miss the family I kept hoping they would become. But that family never really existed. It was just a story I told myself to survive. What actually existed was a system where I was supposed to give and they were supposed to take, where my achievements were invisible but my usefulness was always clear, where I was born into the wrong chapter of their story and they never let me forget it. I did not report Derek to hurt my sister. I did not cut off my parents to punish them. I did it because for the first time in 35 years, I chose myself. And I know some people think that is selfish. But here is what I have learned. Choosing yourself is not selfish when everyone else has already chosen themselves at your expense. If you are listening to this and you see yourself in my story, if you have spent your whole life giving to people who only know how to take, I want you to know something. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to walk away from people who only value you for what you provide. And when you do, the right people will still be there. They might be coworkers or friends or people you have not even met yet, but they will show up. They will see you. They will celebrate you without conditions. The ones who leave when you stop sacrificing were never really your family. They were just people who expected you to carry them. And you were never too much. You were never not enough. You were just in the wrong room surrounded by people who could not see what you were worth. Find the right room. The right people are waiting. I stand at my window now watching the sunrise paint the city in gold and pink. My diploma hangs on the wall behind me, not for anyone else to see, but for myself. Beside it is that photograph of Barbara and my colleagues, the family I chose, and the people who chose me back. I smile, and it is not a sad smile or a bitter one. It is peaceful, the kind of peace that comes from finally telling yourself the truth. I did not lose my family. I lost the lie that kept me small, and in losing it, I finally found myself. Thank you for staying with Madison's story until the very end. Before you go, I want to take a moment to talk about what we can learn from everything she went through, because her experience is far more common than most people realize. Family financial abuse is one of the most underreported forms of exploitation in America. It happens in homes that look perfect from the outside. It happens to people who are smart, successful, and capable. It happens because we are taught from childhood that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that we should forgive and forget no matter what. But here is the truth that Madison learned the hard way. Love should never cost you your identity, your credit, or your peace of mind. If the people who claim to love you are the same people who exploit you, that is not family. That is a transaction disguised as a relationship. There are several important lessons from Madison's story that I hope you will carry with you. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Madison noticed the red flags about Derek early on, but she dismissed them because she wanted to believe the best about her sister's fiancé. Your gut feeling exists for a reason. Listen to it. Second, protect your personal information, even from family. Your social security number, your credit history, your financial documents, these should be guarded carefully. It is not paranoid to be cautious. It is smart. Third, check your credit report regularly. Madison went over a year without checking hers, and that gave Derek 18 months to destroy her financial reputation. Free credit monitoring services exist. Use them. Fourth, know that setting boundaries is not betrayal. Walking away from people who hurt you is not cruel or selfish. It is survival. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot build a life while people are constantly tearing it down. Most importantly, remember this. Your worth is not determined by how much you sacrifice for others. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to choose yourself without guilt or apology. If Madison's story resonated with you, if you saw pieces of your own life reflected in her struggles, I want you to know that you are not alone. Thousands of people have walked this same painful path, and thousands have found their way to the other side. Healing is possible. Peace is possible. A better life is waiting for you, but you have to be willing to reach for it. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something similar with your own family? How did you handle it? What advice would you give to someone who is currently in Madison's situation? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this video touched your heart or taught you something valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you never miss another story. Every subscription helps us continue sharing stories that matter, stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way to strength and healing. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, you deserve a family that loves you for who you are, not for what you can give them. Until next time, take care of yourself. You are worth it.